My name is Emily Carter. I am 29 years old. I live in Seattle, Washington. I grew up with my older sister Vanessa, who was always seen as perfect one in our family, while I often felt invisible. Beside her growing up after our parents passed away, everything between us changed in ways I did not expect. We were left with their estate and the house and memories that suddenly felt heavier than before. At first I believed we would support each other through the process of reading the will together, but Vanessa acted different from the moment we entered the office. She avoided looking at me directly and kept checking documents faster than usual, as if she already knew what was inside. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was grief affecting her, but something inside me felt uneasy. The lawyer read the documents in a formal tone that felt distant and cold, while I listened carefully, trying to understand every detail of what we were being left behind. Slowly, I noticed Vanessa tightening her grip on her bag and avoiding my gaze whenever I looked her way. When everything was supposed to be explained, I felt confusion rising, because the distribution of inheritance did not match what I expected. Nearly everything seemed transferred in ways that gave control to Vanessa, while my share was almost gone. I sat there trying to process it, feeling as if the ground beneath me had shifted. Without warning, Vanessa stayed silent, but her silence felt heavier than any words she could say. After the meeting, I asked questions, but answers came slowly and vaguely, as if someone was avoiding telling me the full truth. When I later reviewed copies of the paperwork alone in my apartment, I noticed something deeply wrong. My signature appeared on documents that I did not remember signing, and the dates did not match any moment I could recall. This realization made my chest tighten as I began to understand that something far more serious might have happened between me and my own sister. I replayed every moment from the day of the meeting, trying to remember if I had missed anything important, but my memory was clear enough to know that I had never agreed to what was written there. The thought that someone could have used my identity in such a personal and painful way made me feel both angry and betrayed. I could not stop thinking about Vanessa and her strange behavior during those moments when she seemed too calm, almost rehearsed, as if she had prepared for everything in advance. I began to question not only the inheritance but also the trust that I had always placed in my sister. The memories of childhood that once felt warm now felt distant and uncertain, as if they belonged to someone else entirely. I walked through my apartment, staring at old photographs, trying to find any sign that would explain how everything had shifted so suddenly between us. I felt alone in a way I had never experienced before, and yet deep down I knew that the truth was waiting somewhere just beyond what I had already discovered, and I was no longer willing to ignore it, no matter how painful it might become. The only thing I could do now was search for answers, even if it meant uncovering secrets that would change everything I believed about my family and the life I thought was secure and unshakable. And as I sat alone that night, I realized nothing would ever be the same after discovering the inconsistencies in the inheritance documents. I could not let it go, no matter how much I tried to distract myself. Every thought kept pulling me back to the feeling that something had been stolen from me in a way that was not only financial but deeply personal. The next morning I decided to confront my sister Vanessa, but when I saw her, she acted completely normal, as if nothing had happened. She greeted me with a calm smile and spoke about her wedding plans as if our lives were still aligned. This calmness unsettled me because it felt rehearsed and distant. I tried to bring up the inheritance, carefully watching her reaction, but she immediately dismissed my concerns, saying everything had been handled properly and that I was just overwhelmed by grief. Her words sounded smooth and controlled, but something in her expression flickered for just a second, as if she was hiding something behind her composure. After leaving her house, I felt more confused than before, so I decided to go directly to the lawyer who had handled our parents' will. When I arrived at the office, I noticed how tense the atmosphere felt compared to my first visit. The receptionist seemed hesitant when she saw me, and the Lawyer himself took longer than expected to meet me. Once we finally spoke, I began asking direct questions about the documents and the signing process. I explained that I did not remember signing certain papers and that my share of the inheritance seemed altered. His reaction shifted slightly from professional calmness to concern as he reviewed the file again in front of me. After several minutes of silence, he admitted that there were irregularities in the paperwork and that some documents appeared to have been submitted electronically from an unfamiliar source. This revelation made my stomach drop because it confirmed my fear that something had been manipulated without my consent. I left the office feeling dizzy and overwhelmed, replaying every possible explanation in my mind, trying to understand how someone could have done this without me noticing. As I walked through the city streets, everything around me felt distant and unreal, as if I was watching someone else's life instead of my own. I began to investigate further on my own, checking emails, bank notifications, and old messages, trying to trace any moment where my identity could have been used without permission. During this search, I discovered emails that I never sent confirming approvals for legal steps related to the inheritance. The more I looked, the clearer it became that someone had carefully constructed a false trail using my identity while keeping me unaware of the decisions being made in my name. Meanwhile, Vanessa continued preparing for her wedding, posting updates and invitations as if her life was completely untouched by any of this. Contradiction between her public happiness and my private confusion made me question everything I thought I knew about her. I started to wonder if I had ever truly seen her clearly, or if I had only seen the version of her that she wanted me to see. As the days passed, the evidence continued to build, and the sense of betrayal grew heavier inside me until one afternoon, I received a call from the lawyer that changed everything. He confirmed that key documents had been signed on a date when I was not even in the country, and that there was no legitimate record of my physical presence or consent for those actions. This confirmation shattered the last piece of doubt I had left and left me standing at a point where there was no longer any room for misunderstanding. Only one truth remained: that someone very close to me had taken advantage of my trust, and now I had to decide what to do with that truth before it destroyed me completely. After hearing from the lawyer that the documents were signed when I was not even in the country, everything inside me shifted from confusion to a cold, focused determination. I realized that reacting emotionally would not fix anything, and if I confronted Vanessa too soon, she would find a way to explain it or cover it up again. So I made a decision to stay quiet and start collecting every possible piece of evidence that could prove what really happened. I began by going through every old file and message related to our parents' estate, trying to rebuild the timeline step by step. I also reached out carefully to people who had been involved in the process without revealing too much about what I suspected. I needed them to speak freely without feeling pressured or aware that I was investigating them as well. Each conversation gave me small fragments of information that slowly started to form a clearer picture of what had been done behind my back. As I continued digging, I discovered that several approvals had been processed from devices and locations that did not match mine, and this detail made the situation even more suspicious because it showed that someone had intentionally tried to replicate my identity in a convincing way. I also managed to request access to certain security logs from the law office after insisting that I needed them for clarification, and what I saw there confirmed my worst fears. There were timestamps showing access from an unknown source during key moments when documents were being finalized, and it became obvious that the system had been manipulated in a careful and planned way. During all of this, Vanessa continued her life without showing any sign of stress or guilt. She was fully focused on her wedding preparations, choosing venues, flowers, and decorations as if nothing else existed, and every time I saw her updates online, it felt like she was living in a completely different reality from mine. This contrast between her public happiness and my Private investigation made me feel isolated and emotionally drained, but it also strengthened my resolve because I knew I was getting closer to the truth even if it hurt more with every step as the wedding date approached. I began to realize that this event was not just a celebration but the perfect stage where everything about her image was about to be fully exposed. I started planning carefully, thinking about how to present the evidence in a way that could not be ignored or dismissed. I wanted there to be witnesses, people who had once trusted her just like I had, so that the truth would not be buried or twisted afterward. The most important piece of evidence came unexpectedly when a former assistant from the law office contacted me saying she had noticed something strange during the document process and had saved a backup recording of internal system activity. After reviewing it, I found clear indications that Vanessa had been in contact with someone inside the process, guiding certain steps indirectly and ensuring the outcome matched her interests. This recording was the final confirmation I needed. It was no longer about suspicion or doubt, it was now undeniable proof that everything had been carefully orchestrated, and once I had it in my hands, I knew there was no turning back. I looked at the wedding invitation sitting on my table and understood that the moment of truth would arrive there in front of everyone, and even though it terrified me, I also knew that it was the only way to reclaim what had been taken from me and expose the reality that had been hidden for far too long. The day of Vanessa's wedding arrived, and everything around me felt unreal, as if I had stepped into a world that was carefully designed to hide the truth from everyone. Attending the venue was decorated with elegant white flowers, soft lighting, and calm music that created an atmosphere of perfection. But inside me there was nothing calm, only a heavy pressure building with every passing minute. I arrived early and walked through the venue, watching guests greet each other with smiles and laughter, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Vanessa looked stunning in her dress, moving through the crowd with confidence as if she was living inside a dream that could never be broken. Seeing her like that made my emotions clash, because part of me still remembered the sister I grew up with, while another part of me knew what she had done to me. I kept my distance, watching everything carefully, waiting for the right moment, holding the evidence tightly in my mind and in my hands. As the ceremony began, I sat among the guests, pretending to be just another attendee, while inside I was replaying every moment of betrayal that had led me here. The vows were spoken, and people around me were emotional, some even crying as if witnessing a perfect love story unfold, but I could not feel any of it because I knew the foundation of everything here was built on lies. When the ceremony ended and everyone moved toward the reception area, the energy shifted into celebration with music, food, and speeches. Vanessa was glowing as she prepared to give her speech, thanking everyone for being part of her special day. She stood in front of the crowd, confident and smiling, holding the microphone as if nothing in the world could shake her. At that exact moment, I realized this was the point of no return. I stood up, slowly, feeling every eye beginning to notice me, and walked toward the front. Before anyone could stop me, the room grew quiet as confusion spread across the guests' faces. Vanessa paused mid-sentence, her smile fading slightly as she saw me approach. I did not raise my voice or act aggressively. I simply began presenting everything I had uncovered piece by piece. First, the documents showing the inheritance changes, then the timeline inconsistencies, and finally the recorded proof that tied everything together. As I spoke, the atmosphere in the room changed completely. Whispers replaced laughter, and people began looking between me and Vanessa, trying to understand what was happening. Vanessa tried to interrupt me, insisting that there must be a mistake, but her voice sounded less confident than before, and for the first time I saw uncertainty in her eyes. As more details were revealed, the guests began to realize that this was not a misunderstanding but something far more serious. Some people looked shocked, others looked betrayed, and a few simply stood in silence, unable to process what they were hearing. The perfect image she had built around herself started to crack under the weight of the truth, and as the final piece of evidence played, the room fell completely silent. Vanessa stood frozen, unable to deny what was being shown. Her expression shifted from disbelief to panic as she realized she could no longer control the narrative. Everything she had carefully hidden was now exposed in front of everyone she cared about, and the wedding that was supposed to be the happiest day of her life had turned into the moment everything collapsed around her. And as I stood there watching the chaos unfold, I knew there was no going back from this point forward. Everything between us would change forever, and the truth would finally be impossible to bury again. After the wedding fell apart, everything that followed felt like a slow emotional aftershock that I could not fully process at first. The venue that had once been filled with celebration was now silent and tense as guests slowly left in confusion and discomfort. Vanessa stood at the center of it all, completely exposed and no longer able to hide behind the perfect image she had built for years. I remember feeling strangely numb as I watched the consequences unfold, not because I did not care, but because everything had happened so fast that my mind struggled to catch up. Later that night, I went back to my apartment and sat alone in silence, replaying every moment from the confrontation, wondering if there had been any other way to handle it. But deep down, I knew I had reached a point where silence would have meant losing everything that was rightfully mine. The following days were filled with legal discussions and formal statements as the evidence I presented was reviewed and verified by professionals who confirmed that the inheritance process had been manipulated and that my consent had been falsified. This validation brought a strange mix of relief and sadness, because while justice was finally taking shape, it also confirmed that my own sister had been responsible for actions that changed both our lives forever. Vanessa did not reach out immediately after everything collapsed, and for a while I thought she might never speak to me again, but eventually I received a message asking to meet, not to argue but simply to talk. When we met, she looked different from the confident woman I had seen at her wedding. She seemed tired and distant, as if the weight of everything had finally caught up to her. During our conversation, there were moments of silence that felt heavier than words. She eventually admitted that fear had driven many of her choices, especially the fear of losing control over the family inheritance and the stability she thought she needed to secure her future. Hearing her explanation did not erase what she had done, but it helped me understand the mindset that led her there. Even if I could not fully accept it over time, the legal process allowed me to recover what was taken from me and restore my rightful share of our parents' estate. But the emotional recovery was far more complicated than any legal outcome. I spent many nights thinking about the version of my sister I used to know compared to the person she had become, and I realized that both versions were real in their own way, which made forgiveness a complicated feeling to hold. Eventually, there was a second conversation between us, calmer and more honest, where we acknowledged the damage that had been done. Without trying to rewrite the past, we agreed that our relationship would never return to what it once was, but there was a small understanding that allowed us both to move forward separately rather than remain trapped in resentment. As time passed, I began rebuilding my life, focusing on work, personal growth, and the relationships that had supported me during the hardest moments. I learned how important it is to trust my instincts even when the truth is uncomfortable, and how silence in the face of wrongdoing can sometimes cost more than confrontation. In the end, I did not get a perfect resolution or a healed family, but I did regain my sense of self and the ability to move forward without constantly questioning my reality, and that became the most important outcome of everything that happened, because even though the betrayal changed my life, it also taught me that I was stronger than I ever believed and capable of standing up for myself, even when it meant losing everything I once thought defined me.